Welcome to From the Desk, an official podcast of Bethel Community Church. My name is Solomon Wutchpau, and this is Leonard Tavernelli. We get to serve as pastors here at Bethel. And Leonard, this last Sunday, you started a series on worship, and you preached through Psalm 95. Now, I know there were lots of different things that you could get into, and I know we're going to be doing multiple sermons through worship, but are there, talk about different pieces of Psalm 95 from your sermon that you would like to maybe hit home for us again.
Yeah, so more than anything, just helping people walk away with, because there's a lot when it comes to worship. And certainly, like you said, we'll get it over the weeks, but really having a good foundation for the whole series, just summarizing some of the main takeaways. One is that worship is something we're always doing. Right now, even if you're watching or listening to this podcast, you're worshiping because in some way you are putting value into it. You are in some way saying, okay, this is worthy of my time. Worship is inescapable for us because God created us in His image and likeness. And so as His image bearers, we will worship, and we can't help not to worship. The problem is, in sin, our worship is corrupted, and so we worship created things rather than the Creator, as Paul talks about in Romans 1. And often the number one thing we worship is self. We put ourselves ahead of everything else. But it's important for us to recognize worship is just part of who we are as humans. What we can do is decide who or what we're going to worship. And as Psalm 95 makes clear, we're to worship the Lord and Him alone. And though the Psalm talks about singing in verses 1 through 5, in verses 6 and 7, it really goes beyond that to talk about how worship is bowing down to the Lord. It's kneeling before Him. It's how we respond to Him. In fact, that's really where verses 6 through 11 go, is worship is a response to God, who He's revealed Himself to be, and what He's revealed we're to do. This is where it's important that we understand, as Jesus says, we're to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and we're to love our neighbor as ourself. Really, that's what worship is about. We're responding to God's revelation. And so worship includes singing, but it doesn't end at singing praise. Worship is about all of life, as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Everything you do in life, you're to do to the glory of God. And that's really what worship is about. It's living for the glory of God. And it includes gathering in worship and being scattered in worship, going out. Both are important rhythms in life. And if you're not worshiping in one, then you're not going to be worshiping in the other. The two go together, or they don't, or you are failing to worship God. They'll build off each other. None of us gets this perfect. Again, we're all sinners. But as we grow in responding to God, and to how He reveals Himself, who He reveals Himself to be in His plans for us, we can grow in worshiping God rightly, biblically, and in a way that pleases Him, so that in all of life our worship is glorifying and enjoying Him.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful for us to see the value in both, and that they feed each other, as we learn to worship rightly in church, that actually helps us to worship throughout the week, but also vice versa is true. That as we learn to worship throughout the week, how much more enriching is our worship when we actually gather
Yes.
together. Yeah, I think those things are helpful for us. And we look forward to hearing more from you, Pastor Leonard, in terms of how we worship in life and in church.
Yeah.
Okay, so in verse 6, you quoted it. It says, "Let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." So this is clearly talking about our physical postures as we worship. This isn't talking about raising hands. There's different portions of Scripture that talk about raising hands in worship. But typically, as evangelicals, as Protestants, maybe when we think about physical expression in worship on a Sunday morning, maybe hand raising is the extent of what some people might think about. But kneeling down and bowing down maybe feels like, it's been a long time since anyone's used kneelers.
True. And we don't have them.
Yeah. But we're about to get them, which is why we're reading these.
No.
No. So talk to us about physical posture in worship.
Yeah, so really our physical posture should be an outward expression of our internal posture, our disposition.
Right.
And it's important that we understand that what we do physically will in some sense be culturally contextualized. And so, for instance, I don't expect next week for us to show up. I mean, we have, as a church, we have a Scandinavian and Norwegian background. I mean, people who are not known for outward physical expressions in worship. I mean, if we showed up and everybody was dancing around or something, as a church, people would be in shock, and it would not be truly loving to our neighbors if we were saying, "Hey, everybody do this now." Probably most of our people would be horrified and thinking, "What is going on here?"
Yeah.
Those aren't wrong expressions, though. I mean, we see throughout the Psalms, for instance. So here we have bowing down and kneeling. Even bowing down at times would be face first in the ground. This would have been very appropriate in ancient Israel. Likewise, dancing can be appropriate in worship. Now, not as a performance. I don't think that's where the Psalms are getting is, so I have nothing against ballet per se. But I don't think that it would be appropriate in a worship gathering because you have one or two people just performing for everybody else. I think the same goes for singing. I think you have to be very careful about special music where you just have a soloist or something, because you're taking it away from the congregation who is gathered to worship together. Now, again, I don't know that it's necessarily wrong, but I think we have to be very careful with it. And so dancing can be appropriate. I mean, you go to some cultures and people are going to be dancing. I mean, in our culture, if people are just swaying, that's about normally as much dancing as you're going to get out of people. But it's not wrong to do so, especially if that's how your culture expresses itself in worship. There's nothing wrong with that at all. When it comes to uplifted hands, for instance, Psalm 141 verse 2 talks about it, but it's in the context of prayer. That's where I think probably more of when we're singing songs that are talking specifically to God is where lifting your hands in some way becomes truly an expression that's fitting, because in essence you're praying to God in that song. Likewise, Psalm 47 verse 1 talks about clapping of hands and shouting aloud to God. There's this enthusiastic celebration that can be right in worship. Again, part of it is understanding, okay, what's culturally acceptable. Not clapping in all cultures is not always about enthusiastic celebration. I mean, it can be something that's done really in sort of almost a mockery way, if I understand it correctly. But this is where we have to say, okay, culturally, what is acceptable? And I think we can push the boundaries some. and start to even grow in this. Because, I mean, if somebody comes in and, comes from an African culture or something, or even a Latin American culture, dancing's probably pretty appropriate, whereas it might be harder for somebody in, North American culture. But being open to others expressing themselves within worship being ordered. So it can't become something chaotic.
Right. You're not talking about someone who would run up and down the aisles or skipping up through the aisles in the name of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
But more probably even when you go cross-culturally, a lot of those expressions of worship, though it might seem louder and more lively than maybe what we're used to in our context, it still is maybe more clapping and swaying and movement in one spot rather than running around in the sanctuary.
Yeah, and this is where, for instance, clapping with the music, in some cultures, if you can get them to clap on beat with the music, you've really gotten people to go a long way. But so there wouldn't be a problem if somebody is dancing per se. Again, as long as it's not hey, everybody has to dance with me, or something that's completely just drawing the attention of everyone off of God because it's just culturally inappropriate for that context.
Yeah. So in the physical expression, so say, again, I think in our church, in our context, one of the things that maybe is more normal and acceptable, though maybe not done by the majority of people, is something like hand raising.
Mm-hmm.
Would you go as far as to say you would encourage our church in doing something like that? Or is physical posture and expression of worship simply optional up to the individual?
So I would say we ought to encourage greater expression because we are whole people created in God's image and likeness. Now, God, of course, is spirit, not physical, but He made us physical beings. And so we don't want to think, well, intellectually I'm raising my hands or something.
Yeah.
We should be growing, stretching ourselves and expressing ourselves. And so if somebody were in, on Sunday to kneel down, and raise their hands or something, we shouldn't be like, what's wrong with that person? We should say, hey, look, they're expressing themselves in worship to God in an appropriate way. Same thing if people were mourning, for instance. We talked about Lamentations some time ago. Mourning can be appropriate. Now, again, it depends on if that's what we're talking about, or if that's what's going on in our society. It can be appropriate to mourn and lament, even in even as we're gathered to worship. But again, it's got to be orderly. It can't be something that's just hey, I'm gonna do this, even though everybody's gonna be completely put off by it. There would be nothing wrong with somebody in their place, kneeling down, raising their hands, closing their eyes, things like that.
Yeah. And even to the lamenting and the mourning piece, there's a difference between someone who is wailing and crying aloud in the gathering of the church versus someone so convicted of their sins or broken over their circumstances in the midst of singing has to kneel down and weep.
Or even sit down and weep. And
right.
That can be appropriate. And that's where. So if as a church we're something happens, and we are publicly lamenting, crying out together aloud can be appropriate. Again, in our context, that might be hard for people, but. It wouldn't be something that you want to do to call attention to yourself. I mean, it may be appropriate to say, okay, I got to step out because this is what I need to do at this time. This is just how God is convicting me or what God is doing to where I need to seek a place where, I'm just so overcome. I don't want to interrupt everyone around me, so I'm going to go do this. But then it can even be appropriate for others to join with them and say, okay, we're going to come around and weep with those who weep.
So you've heard it here. Raise your hands this Sunday in worship. Okay, so this past Sunday, we recited from a catechism, the Westminster Catechism, the first question, the shorter one, in question 1. Now, help us understand, why would we do something like that? How do these catechisms and confessions have anything to do with us? How do we relate to them? Do they have authority over us? Why would we do that?
Yeah, so obviously the Westminster Catechism doesn't have any authority over us in that, it's not even our statement of faith. I mean, ultimately, we say the Bible has ultimate authority. Even our own statement of faith is subject to Scripture and could have errors in it that we just aren't mindful of. And so we need to recognize that the Westminster Shorter Catechism it's of the Presbyterians. We're not Presbyterian, as Prajwal noted, but it's good for us to recognize we are part of the Holy Catholic Church, that is the universal, Catholic in the lowercase c, the universal church that includes Christians who have gone before us, even of differing practices or differing denominations than us. They're still our brothers and sisters in the faith, and they got things right that we build off of. And so that's really what we see in the first question and answer, which is what a catechism is. It's just a question, and then it's answering it. This is what we believe in this matter. I don't know that any of us would disagree with the first question and answer of the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Or we shouldn't.
Yeah, no, I think it's got clear biblical grounds. But what it does is it reminds us, and especially those who may be, within our context, we're in a society that has really broken with its past, and we're wandering somewhere. This is a good way for us to be reminded we're not the first Christians. We're not the first ones trying to figure this out. There are those who have gone before for the past 2,000 years. We are standing on their shoulders. We're thankful for them, even though there are some things we disagree with them on. We want to recognize the rightness in much of what they believed and said. And so we're going to join with them and acknowledge how grateful we are that God raised them up for the moment that He had them, during the 1600s. And we are beneficiaries, and we continue in that line, even if we aren't in full agreement with absolutely everything that they believed and confessed and practiced. Yet, we are reminding, especially those who are younger, who may be grappling with, is Christianity just this new thing? Or is it this, it's just something that we do? No, there are many who've gone before, and we're in agreement with them and thank God for them.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful reminder of why we recite and repeat old catechisms, confessions, creeds in the past. Well, church, we're so glad you joined us on this episode of From the Desk, and we hope to worship with you this coming Sunday. God bless.